Today, we're going to get into something called rhetoric sovereignty. Now, that sounds academic, but it really boils down to a super fundamental question. Who gets to control a community's story? Their history, their data, their knowledge. And the answer, well, it uncovers this deep conflict that's been going on for a long, long time.
So, let me ask you this. Who owns a story? I mean, really owns it. Is it the person telling it? The one who writes it down? Or is it the community that's been passing that story down for generations? You might think the answer is simple, but it actually opens up this huge divide between two totally different ways of seeing the world.
Okay, to really get to the heart of this, we need to look at these two clashing ideas about knowledge. On one side, you have the system we're all pretty familiar with, Western law and copyright. And on the other, you have the ancient system of indigenous law. And they aren't just a little different, they're pretty much polar opposites.
This slide really lays it all out. So, under Western law, the big idea is ownership. An individual person, an author, owns a piece of knowledge like it's a piece of property. But, and this is key, it's temporary. Now, indigenous law, it's all about custodianship. Knowledge isn't owned by one person. It belongs to the whole community, the clan. And it's not for 70-something years, it's forever. The whole focus shifts from property to a sacred relationship.
And that focus on custodianship is just so critical. Because in a lot of indigenous cultures, knowledge isn't written down on a shelf somewhere, it's carried inside of people. This quote just captures it perfectly. When an elder dies, a library burns down. You see, it's not just information being lost. It's a living connection to ancestors, and it's the guide for the future. That's why protecting it is everything.
So, what happens when you force that property model onto a culture that sees knowledge as a sacred relationship? Well, you get harm, a lot of it. Let's talk about what's known as extractive research, which is basically when the search for knowledge turns into a form of theft.
So this is the core of it, right? An outside researcher, maybe an anthropologist or a scientist, comes into a community, they record a story, a song, maybe even take genetic samples, and then they leave. They go on to publish a book, get famous, build their career, and maybe make a lot of money from it. But the community, the actual custodians of that knowledge, they often get nothing. No benefit, and worse, no control over how their own culture is used. It's a one-way street.
Now, to make sure this doesn't feel like just an abstract idea, let's look at a real and pretty famous case that really blew this issue wide open. The story of the Havasupai tribe and Arizona State University. It's a tough one, but it's an absolutely crucial lesson in what happens when trust is broken.
So here's what went down. The tribe was struggling with high rates of diabetes, so they agreed to give blood samples for research on that specific issue. They gave clear, informed consent for one thing and one thing only. But years later, they discovered those same sacred blood samples were being used for all sorts of other studies they never agreed to, things like mental illness and theories about ancient human migration that actually contradicted their most fundamental spiritual beliefs. This wasn't just some mix-up, it was a devastating breach of trust.
In this practice, it has a name: biocolonialism. It's this mindset that treats human genetic material, our very essence, as if it's just another natural resource, like timber or oil, that's just there for science to harvest. It completely ignores that for the Havasupai, their blood is sacred. It contains their identity, their ancestry, their whole story.
The biggest lesson from all this? The Havasupai case absolutely shattered the old idea of what consent means in research. It blew up the idea of broad consent. Where a single signature on a form gives researchers a blank check to do whatever they want. This case proved that real consent has to be specific, it has to be informed, it has to be ongoing, and it absolutely has to respect cultural values. But look, this story isn't just about harm. Not at all. It's also about empowerment. Because in response to problems like this, indigenous nations all over the world are standing up and fighting for a solution. They're building a new way forward.
And that solution is called data sovereignty. It's a simple but incredibly powerful idea that indigenous peoples have the fundamental right to control their own information. Whether we're talking about ancient stories, modern health statistics, or their DNA, it's about flipping the script, moving from being the subjects of research to being the governors of their own data. It's self-determination.
And hey, this isn't just some vague concept. It's actually been developed into a really clear, actionable framework for ethical partnerships. It's called the CARE principles.
So let's break down CARE. It's brilliant. First, C for collective benefit. Any data collected must, first and foremost, benefit the community it came from.
A is for authority to control. The indigenous nation has the final say. They're in the driver's seat. R is for responsibility. Researchers have to be transparent and accountable. And E is for ethics. The rights, the safety, and the well-being of the community always come first. The old model is officially flipped on its head.
So what does all of this add up to? Well, it's more than just a new set of rules for researchers. It's a whole new way of thinking about knowledge itself. It's a new paradigm.
I think this one sentence just says it all. The days of researchers studying communities from a distance, like they're looking at specimens under a microscope, those days are over. The future is partnership. It's about communities and researchers working together as equals, sharing in the journey of creating new knowledge.
And that kind of leaves us with one last big question to chew on. What would actually change in our own lives, in our schools, and our work if we started treating knowledge less like property to be bought and sold and more like a relationship that we have to care for, to nurture, and to protect? Definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining me on this one.